Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about my first endgame build of 3.21, which is the Cast on Crit Rolling Magma Saboteur. Now this build revolves around the Crucible mod that gives Rolling Magma 100% more area effect, with the downside of it not being able to scale with additional projectiles. However, because of the way that Rolling Magma shotguns and the way it overlaps, we're going to talk about that more, that actually isn't that big of a deal. You actually don't really want to scale additional projectiles. So this is kind of just free. Now that on its own might not sound that interesting. However, when you realize that you can have it on a one-handed weapon, on a shield, and also on the new helmet called Element's Visage, you'll realize why this gets pretty crazy real quick. Well, you might think, well, that sounds pretty good, but how the hell do you get that much AoE as you see in the intro? Well, the answer is these modifiers actually scale multiplicative with each other. On top of that, we also use Nimis, which actually works incredibly well with Rolling Magma, kind of randomizing the direction that it goes in, which is very advantageous because you want overlaps. So whenever they come back to you, instead of going on the other side, that is more single target damage. And on top of that, at the end, Rolling Magma has an extra bounce from Nimis, which always goes back towards you, which is very advantageous. We're also using the new Saboteur rework, which is kind of based around triggers. Not only did I want to play with the new Triggerbots, which are a lot better than I give them credit for if you adjust some things with it, more on that later. It also gives you more defensive options with Born in the Shadow that you wouldn't have with an Assassin. That is something that Cast on Crit builds really struggle with, so that is quite good to have in there. And you also have Like Clockwork, which gives us CDR, which makes gearing a lot easier. I chose Cast on Crit purely because it's very comfortable to play. You just have to cycle on top of enemies. You don't have to aim, which I really value in endgame. However, that comes with its own price tag, and I think that a self-cast version for a more budget-friendly approach would definitely be worth it. I'm not going to talk about it in this video, but maybe you can at least glean something from the mechanics and maybe make your own version if you want to. As for what content I've been playing, Legion and Delhi are absolutely buttery smooth with this build with its screen-wide AoE. Single target depends more on gear. However, Nimis helps out a ton. But yeah, let's get into the guide. All right, so before we get into the Rolling Magma mechanics, all the good stuff, I want to quickly just show you the AoE with the different Crucible trees right here. So as you can see, I have 100% more on my weapon, I have 100% more on my helmet, and 100% more on my shield. For the showcase, I put an increased area effect. I usually don't use this, but I don't have any power charges in my hideout, and I also have AoE on kill, so this kind of compensates for it. All right, so first cast is basically raw Rolling Magma, right? We just cast it. And as you can see right here, the AoE is not bad, right? We do scale quite a bit of AoE. It's pretty decent. You probably get 3 or so overlaps. And if you did this with GMP, it would look something like this. However, there's a few problems with that, mainly that each cast can only hit once. So the additional projectiles are only for clear, which means that every bounce can hit the same target again, shotgun, but individual projectiles, only 1 per cast. Which is why I said earlier that having no additional projectiles is no downside if you have that big of an AoE. All right, so let's see how this looks like with just one 100% more multiplier. All right, already a lot better, right? Let's see what happens if you have 2 of them. It gets a lot more interesting, right? We almost have screen-wide AoE, and then we add the helmet on top, and we have the final result right here. And with Cast on Crit, you will get 10 of these out per second, so quite a big AoE. All right, so we learned that it can shotgun with each bounce, but it cannot shotgun with additional projectiles, making that downside not that big of a deal. Now, reduced projectile speed would actually, in theory, increase the overlaps. So this is how the skill would look like with slower projectiles, for example. The problem is that the Magma Orb also falls down slower, which makes the clear just kind of bad. On the other hand, increased projectile speed does exactly the opposite. You're going to overlap less because the bounces are further apart, which looks kind of cool for clear. It is kind of nice and responsive, but at the end of the day, it makes everything a little bit less consistent. Now, Arcanist Brand is technically insane if it wasn't Arcanist Brand. What do I mean by that? Arcanist Brand has a line here that says 40% reduced chaining range, which is kind of like reduced projectile speed without the downside of making the projectile slower, which is kind of cool. The problem is you would have to play Arcanist Brand in order to do so, and Arcanist Brand has absolutely horrendous damage, making this not really a thing. Also on top of each other, we already have so much AoE that overlap isn't that big of a deal anymore, but maybe in the future, whenever this Crucible mod will be gone, that is a new angle. Also, in case you've seen this mod like me and you tried it on a bow, reduced chaining range, this does actually not work. If you look here, it gives the whatever skill it is, the attack mod, because this is an attack. It only says arrows chain +1 times. This part here does not work for Rolling Magma. I had to find out the hard way. Also, you cannot get the Rolling Magma AoE mod on bows. Now then, why do we actually use Nimis? A lot of people use Nimis for the projectiles returned to you. However, we're mostly using it for the last line here, projectiles are fired in random directions. Because turns out this doesn't just work for your initial cast, it also works for all the chains. So if you see right here, it just bounces around aimlessly and completely randomly. And what that does is mostly it just helps out incredibly with overlaps against single target. However, I didn't come up with this. That was actually Tierney69. At least that's why I saw it the first time. Who did this experiment last league. Now, why this is so good is because every direction other than the direction rolling magma goes in is actually better, because you want it to come back and to overlap, not go off the screen. Now, if you want to clear, that can be a good thing, but usually it will really stifle your single target. So if you think about, we cast our rolling magma, this is our enemy, right? The first bounce is here, the second bounce is here, third bounce is here, right? And they maybe overlap 2 to 3 times, but they go outwards and they will never come back. With Nimis, every direction it goes in, it doesn't even matter, is better than outwards. Now, what is not so obvious is that Nimis also gives you +1 chain at the end of its runtime. So whenever the last chain is over, it's going to chain back to you, which is basically another hit. And going back to you is always a good thing. In terms of how often you're going to hit against single target, up to 7 times. One is the initial hit. It also has 4 chains from the gem. You can't scale this to 5 with gem levels, unfortunately, any higher. You also get 1 chain from the helm enchant right here. Rolling magma chains an additional time. And then also 1 chain from Nimis. In terms of how often it hits, it really depends on what are your surroundings. I would say round about 5 to 6 times is usually a safe bet for PoB. However, that's only true if you have all 3 pieces and they all give you 100% more AoE. As for leadership's price, this is our best in slot amulet. The brittle it provides gives you base critical strike chance, which is absolutely insane. It counts for both your spells and your attacks. Scorch gives you reduced enemy resistances, which is very good because we're kind of gem starved in our main setup, so we can't really go for Fire Pen. And then we also have Sap, which makes it so enemies deal less damage, which is a pretty underrated one out of the 3. It doesn't give damage, but it's still very comfy. On top of Born in the Shadows, it gives you pretty good defensive layers. And here's also the point where I remind you that leadership's price has the downside of you needing your 2 top attributes to be equal. So whatever that is, it doesn't matter, but your 2 top attributes have to be the same. If they're not, if they're even off by 1, you'll do like 1/4 of your damage. If you're just off by a little bit, what you can do is you can work around this with like quality. For example, I have exactly only 17% quality, so the dexterity is only there. You can also already buy a Nimis that has exactly the dexterity that you need. Or you can also do micro adjustments. I didn't need it, but you can get like 3, 4, 5 intelligence or dexterity on medium cluster jewels. As always, since you're cast on crit build, you're going to need 52% cooldown recovery rate exactly. If you have more, it's not hurting, but it also doesn't do anything because of how server tick rates work. Just to give you a little bit of a hint of how important this is, if I just get a little bit less cooldown recovery rate, this is what happens to my damage. It basically halves itself. And this is with just 1% cooldown recovery rate off, right? So how do we do this? We get a level 5 Awakened cast on critical strike. Now, you don't have to have a level 5 from the get-go. You can also have a level 2 that you level, and you also get the mastery right here, the crit mastery with plus free level of all critical support gems. Or for the time being, you can also put a craft on your belt. You can get up to 12% increased cooldown recovery on belts. And the other one is like clockwork, which gives you 30% increased cooldown recovery rate. Another thing I want to mention is, sure, you can get this cooldown recovery rate right here on both boots and your belt, but that will mean you will probably lose Tailwind right here, because now you have to go for Shaper Influence. And it also means that once you're juicing and you have a Headhunter or a Mage Blood, well, what are you going to do now? So once again, like with the leadership's price, if something feels off, check your cooldown recovery rate. Another really important thing to check in PoB is that you have 10 attacks per second exactly, not more, not less, so you can actually exactly trigger this. If you go over, the whole cooldown rhythm completely is off. So just make sure you have that. If you have too much, it's bad. If you have too little, it's also bad. Now then, let's talk about Sabo and its new Triggerbots. If you don't know, this is a new Ascendancy right here on the rework. Perfect Crime triggers level 20 summon Triggerbots when allocated. And that is these little buggers down here. They basically look like Skitterbots, and they're also up here in the buff bar. And these little buggers have a ton of upsides, but also downsides. So first up, what happens? So whenever I trigger a spell, instead of triggering it from me, it gets triggered twice from the location of these Triggerbots. If we factor in the 35% less damage from Perfect Crime itself, what this comes out to is actually 30% more damage because it hits twice. And it also gives you double the casts, which then can spread out and give you way more AoE. Also, in theory, if you have a Vitality Watcher's Eye or have it on rings, it also gives you more life gain on spell hit because these still count as your casts, and they also give you more consistent leech. However, there's 2 huge downsides to Triggerbots. The first one is the mana cost, and that's a big yikes. Now, if you don't know, these consume twice the mana cost of your normal cast on crit. And if you don't have a Mage Blood, that is a problem. With Mage Blood, you just solve it on flasks, easy peasy. You can, in theory, also solve it on flasks if you're only mapping. That is actually not going to be really a problem. However, I wanted to have a more permanent solution so I can do more stuff. First up, I'm using Dialas. This is just a really, really good damage chest in general. But I'm also using Divergent Inspiration, which has the quality of 10% reduced mana cost on top of the mana cost it already provides. And since Dialas gives 30% quality, that is an extra 15% reduced mana cost. So in total, it gives me actually 59. Then I use a Militant Faith with the Dominus mod. Gives me Inner Conviction, which gives me more spell damage, and the downside isn't really a downside for me because I'm not getting any frenzy charges. And then that also has a mod of reduced mana cost per 10 devotion, which gives us, with the way I'm pathing right now, another 11% reduced cost. We then also get -8 mana cost from Ring. Now, there is a big problem because we're using both Leadership's Price and Nimis, so we can't have another minus mana cost. However, there's a new mastery that helps out quite a bit, which is the Life Mastery right here. Skills cost life instead of 30% of mana cost, and that all together does it. But once again, if you don't want to bother with that and you're just mapping anyways, you can definitely get a suffix with up to 25% reduced mana cost while the flask is up. However, the worst downside of Triggerbots, and that is why we need Anomalous Convocation tech, is actually that they don't follow around perfectly. They kind of lag behind a little bit. If you have a fast-paced playstyle and you're shield charging around, they're not always going to follow perfectly. Like, look at this, right? A thing that you can do is you can actually use Anomalous Convocation, which helps a lot with that. Now, Convocation basically gets your minions back to you, and since you're already kind of playing a cooldown version of the build anyways, you already have cooldown, you have it on like a cooldown of 2.31 seconds, so they're going to be on top of you almost all the time. And also, they are considered minions, so buff grants 40% increased movement speed counts for them as well, so they get minion movement speed. Now, couple that with an enhance that I'm using anyways for my shield charge to make it faster, chuck it in there, and they get an extra 72% movement speed. And for me personally, that was the difference of them feeling clunky or them actually feeling awesome. But with Triggerbots out of the way, why did I choose Saboteur? Now, you can go two ways about this. You can go Assassin, and you can have Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame, with Perfect Crime if you also want the Triggerbots, which is totally viable, but I'm just going to tell you the reason why I went with Sabo. Sabo has a lot of quality of life. Now, the cooldown you want to get to is 52%. For the perfect trigger rate. You can achieve that already with the Awaken Cast on Critical Strike, right? You can go +2 levels on the Mastery right here. You can get up to +3. And then you couple that with a Boots mod for up to 20% cooldown recovery. You can even craft it on Belt. However, this mod basically takes that gearing pressure away and gives you a little bit more freedom in general. The biggest reason I actually want to go a Saboteur, though, is Born in the Shadows. Custom crit builds are usually really stretched thin for defenses because they need so many different things. They need attack crit, they need spell crit, they need everything else a build needs. And at the end, what comes out is kind of a glass cannon, right? A lot of the times. However, you can gear around this, but Born in the Shadows helps a lot by giving you another defensive layer. And don't get me wrong, by no means is this build tanky. However, I have leveled to level 99 just in maps with legions. I've also been doing Deli Mirrors and beyond on top with all the bosses, so it's not like I've been doing just easy content. And the last point is actually pretty underrated, which is Bomb Specialist. Now, this doesn't look fancy, right? 20% chance to take 50% less area damage from hits is like whatever, right? It's up half of the time, so you could like kind of even it out to 10% less hit damage taken from area. And you could say the top is like 20% chance to deal 50% more area damage. You even it out, it's like 10% more damage. But what people don't give this note credit for is that that's not what it actually says. It does give you the 50% more damage sometimes, which is very important for your alt ailments with Leadership's Price. You only need that one big roll of Brittle or that one big roll of Scourge and Sapped to actually get full effect of it. So in a sense, this node also reads 50% more effective ailments. We do still yoink a nice node from Assassin, which is Deadly Infusion. It gives you the base crit chance while maximum power charges and some crit multi, which we're actually pretty much lacking. So that's a nice thing. And if you go Assassin, you'll be a little bit squishier. You probably do a little bit more damage. And then you would just probably go for Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame with Triggerbots. All right, as a map showcase, I'm actually going to show you a Veritania map right here because it also has a boss. Now, this build is incredibly smooth to play. There's not really any buttons at all other than Cyclone, which is one of the big upsides of this. I just love it, personally. So all you have to do is on left click, you have Convocation, right? So your Triggerbots get that movement speed boost and always go towards you, which means the triggers of the rolling magmas are not going to lag behind you. Other than that, you just cycle on top of enemies. It's going to trigger. You have Frost Blink, which is a very nice movement skill because you can still activate it while cycloning. It's not going to take you out of it. Shield Charge for more long range distance. Val Haste is really nice for clear, but don't activate it against bosses because against bosses it screws up your attack speed rhythm, which will actually decrease your damage. However, while you're clearing, it's just going to give you movement speed and the damage doesn't really matter that much. If you're suffering for damage, that can also be a consideration to remove. Now, I usually farm Deli plus Legion with this, but I'm just going to show you this real quick. Just a little bit of explosions. If you're wondering, this is Sun Prism Herald MTX, I think, which is very pretty. I don't use any MTX on rolling Magma. There's the green one, which looks very oppressive and kind of cool, but once you have a boss and you see all the overlaps, it's just going to blind you real badly. And the blue one is just hideous, in my opinion. So personally, I don't use an MTX on that, but yeah, you already know what you're going to do with whatever MTX. I'm going to show you the boss real quick. The clear you've already seen in the intro. Now, what is happening right here? Oh, there's a cooldown. Okay, whatever. Let's go up here. Now, Veritania right here. I guess the only thing you have to realize is the damage is a little bit delayed. So it's basically going to be a little bit of build up until you get your power charge. You could also see the recovery right here. It's really, really quick. And yeah, the single target is pretty remarkable for cast on crit build that is more focused on mapping. Let's talk about items real quickly. The three most important items are the ones that have Crucible trees, which is your weapon, your helmet, and your shield. On all of them, you want the Rolling Magma mod right here. If you can't get the helmet, just know that your AoE will be halved. I think the build still works fine, but it will do a lot less damage and have less clear. If you don't know how to make Crucible trees, I'll link down below a video from Captain Lance and also Dire Grey on that topic. As for my weapon, I went pretty basic with it. I just spammed some essences of Zeals until I had the attack speed with critical strike multiplier. To note here, you would want the increased critical strike chance instead of the multiplier if you don't have this mod right here. This mod is incredible because it gives you base crit and the minus 500 accuracy doesn't matter because on the weapon you have hits can't be evaded anyways. You also want a good dagger base, for example, an Imperial Scheme, which has a lot of attack speed and crit chance. We are kind of a spellcaster, but you have to trigger them with your attacks, so that's important. Other than that, my tree is pretty dog shit. Now, my helmet, on the other hand, is pretty nice. Now, this doesn't really have any stats. It's all about the Crucible tree right here. I made this one right here with 75 life. I get some increased armor evasion energy shield. The brittle doesn't do anything because we already have leadership's price. This one is actually quite nice. Chance to avoid being poisoned, which makes me poison immune. And the downside doesn't matter because I'm also bleed immune. And being bleed and poison immune, kind of nice. Now, as for the shield itself, I bought an expensive base right here with +1 to maximum power charges. This is an energy shield base. If you buy an evasion base, for example, and you get spell suppression on here, that will run you a lot less currency. The only downside is that you can't roll +1 to fire gems, which I didn't do anyway because I ran out of money. So yeah, kind of a stupid investment in the end, but whatever. I have a little bit of spell damage, a little bit of spell crit. I just basically re-rolled caster mods on Harvest over here. It's kind of cheap and it worked out. It was pretty decent. The res is a little bit overkill. I'm actually over res capped. There's two mods here that are really strong. Now I have some okay mods right here. They don't really matter. Obviously, you want the Rolling Magma mod, but if you can get it, get 3% of life recovered when you suppress spell damage. This mod is incredible against some mob types, like for example, Spark Mages or I don't know. Like it's just absolutely massive and you can definitely feel the difference. Then we have Dialas, which gives you effects according to what color of sockets you put it in. If you put it in a red socket, you get +2 levels of whatever gems in there. You can also get 30 quality, which is very nice for your support gems. More on that in the gem section, but just know that you can basically put any color into whatever. This chest is completely insane because it gives you so much gem levels to your main skill, and you can have some quite fancy corruptions on it. On this build, the two best ones, or the three best ones actually, are +2 level of socketed proj gems, AoE gems, or just +1 level of socketed gems. And these gem levels make a huge damage difference, so if you have the cash for it, definitely go for it. Leadership's price, complete no-brainer. One thing I want to say is the minus res rolls from -3 to +3 maximum. Depends on your budget. If you can get a perfect one or an almost perfect one, but just don't go negative. And then we have Nimis, which I also talked about in the intro. These are kind of like your baseline items. And we have some filler items starting with the gloves. This is basically just to get you spell suppress capped, a little bit of life, res. Attack speed is going to be very important, so you actually reach your attack speed cap. If you have it on one of your flasks as a suffix, you probably don't need this roll. Definitely check in POB. You want to be at around about 10 attacks per second. As implicits, get Unnerve, which makes it so enemies take 10% more spell damage, and fire exposure as well. Those are very important. As for belt, if you have a Mage Blood Headhunter, you know what to do. If you don't, you can either get bleed immunity, you can get just a leather belt, a heavy belt, a Stygian Vice, whatever you want. Important is just that you fix your resistances. Belt is also a great way to get some Chaos Res into your build. On top of that, we have what we call Poverty Boots. Now, these are the result of me not having any more currency to continue crafting. I basically just threw together Elusive Tailwind. I hoped for a prefix open. We got an open prefix. We crafted on movement speed. Just so you know, you can definitely make this build a lot faster with better boots and an enchant. And then ring, you can do some synthesized ring. For example, the minus mana cost is incredibly nice. And you definitely want the minus non-channeling mana cost with quality of life and mana modifiers, which is the Fertile Catalyst, right? On here, you want to fix your strength, most likely if you don't get it from belt already, and just some resistances at life. If you have resistances elsewhere, you can also craft with Essences of Scorn. It will make up for some of the crit multi we're missing. As for jewels, the most important one is an Immutable Force. I have a perfect roll here because I kind of snagged it. You don't really need a perfect roll. I would say that around about 600, 700, 800 is enough already, whatever is in your budget. Basically, it makes it so you don't really feel any stuns while doing Cyclone. Pretty hard to get stun immune nowadays without giving up evasion, so that is a pretty huge deal and definitely worth a jewel slot. You can also go for the whole stun tag with Blood Notch. That's completely up to you. I have a random jewel in here with Corrupted Blood immunity. Get as much crit multi and life on here as you can. As for the Watcher's Eye, nothing really that important. Now, if you have a shield that gives you spell suppression, you're probably not going to need that Grace mod, but if you don't, you're definitely going to need it. So that is pretty big. If you can get the Flash Charge mod, crit multi mod, whatever, just random damage mods. It also depends on what auras you're using. Movement speed while Grace would be super nice. You can also snag in a Vitality and get some Vitality on spell hit. You can fix your Leech with it, whatever you want, right? Militant Faith is really important. It gets socketed in here. What you want is the Dominus with... So you basically get the Inner Conviction. And you want the reduced mana cost per devotion. Otherwise, you're going to have a ton of troubles with mana. On top of that, if you get area damage, elemental damage, or elemental resistances, that will help out a lot. As for flasks, starting off with the worst one, you should not use a quartz flask on this. I'm just kind of not capped on spell suppression without it right now. That is because I bought not the right shield. But if you have the spell suppression capped, you would want something else here. I'm not really sure what. Probably a Taste of Hate, actually. Probably a Taste of Hate. Otherwise, something with reduced effect of curses, always nice for mapping. Jade Flask, you definitely want with increased evasion rating. Pretty much a no-brainer. Quicksilver with movement speed, we all know how it goes. Diamond Flask can help out with crit chance. Now, theoretically, we are capped with Brittle without this. However, there is some maps where there's like mods that make it so you don't. So the Diamond Flask helps a lot there. Also, if your gear is not up to par, this will also help you out a ton. And then there's also Progenesis, which is currently the best flask in the game, and it's a defensive powerhouse. If you can afford it, it's very expensive, but if you can afford it, it is absolutely insane. Just so you know, I just bought it on level 99. We got to level 99 completely without it. Now, what I had before here was actually an Amethyst flask. So just so you know, I don't have much Chaos Res on my gear. That definitely makes up for it. All right, next up, let's talk about gem setups. We have our main setup with Rolling Magma. I have a normal one because it's the 2120. If you can get an anomalous one that gives you extra AoE, that would be GG. I've tried 16 at this point. I don't want to try anymore, so just gave up. But that gives you an extra 10% AoE, which is obviously better than just increased damage. Pretty nice to have. In Power 4, this gives you a ton of damage. Even in Power 3 is incredible if you have a Dialas. Just so you know, these two gems go into a red socket on the Diala, so they get the +2 levels. All the rest of the gems go into green sockets, so they get extra quality. From this, you get extra crit on quality, reduced mana cost on quality, and actually more movement speed on Cyclone quality. This is your cost on crit setup. This gives you power charges and more damage. Very strong. You don't have any other source of power charges, so this is not just for the more damage. Inspiration is a must-have, otherwise your mana cost is going to be really bad. Cyclone is your trigger, and if you have Divergent, which is a little bit more expensive, then you're also going to get the more movement speed. Also, another nice side effect of stacking so much AoE for Rolling Magma is a lot of it is global, so it also counts towards your Cyclone, making it a lot smoother to trigger. Our aura setup is Grace, Anomalous, Purity of Elements. If you want to go for a Determination angle, sure, do it. Purity of Elements just kind of solves so many problems for me. Ailment immunity, and also kind of being tight on resistances. Just really nice. I have an Enlighten here. It only needs to be level 3. Depending on your situation, maybe only level 2. Maybe it needs to be level 4. You have to check that yourself. And also Herald of Ash. This one is just a little bit more damage, and it just looks really cool. As a movement skill, we have Shield Charge with faster attacks. I also have Enhance in here to get even more movement speed. from the quality. However, that's not all, because we also get the anomalous convocation here, which also gets affected by the enhance. I already talked about that in the Triggerbots section. It makes the Triggerbots a lot more responsive. We have our cast on crit setup with Immortal Call, cast on damage taken, and increased duration. You want the Immortal Call exactly at level 3 and the cast on damage taken at level 1. And that is basically so you have the most consistent uptime. Just so you know, we have no way of getting any endurance charges for the increased duration. It is still the best guard skill that we can use. Now, in these links as well, so it can be affected by increased duration, we also have Val Haste in here. We're not using Haste, only Val Haste. We have the random precision in here. Just so you know, we only use this because of our Watcher's Eye. Otherwise, it's completely useless. We have hits can't be evaded, and the little bit of crit is usually not worth its own slot. We have our good old Sniper's Mark with Divergent Mark on hit. Since this is very expensive and it can get annoying, kind of like a problem with mana, we also have life tap support in here. And then we also have a Lonely Frostblink over here. If you don't know, this is the only movement skill that you can cast while Cyclone without taking you out of it. And the last gem is open because I'm a noob. As for passive tree, what you're looking for is capping your crit, getting the power charges that you can, anointing the third one. That is quite important. Yeah, you want to get up to here to Disciple of the Forbidden, Heart of Flame. You want to pick up all the AoE on the way. You can go for way more AoE, but as you see, I didn't actually go overboard because I realized just how crazy the AoE is already. Our large cluster setup, which basically consists of a large cluster right here. The most important thing is that you get Leech. If you don't have that, you have to get it from your glove implicit. So definitely get that. You can also get it on a Vitality Watcher's Eye if you want to, but you need some sort of leech. And we're also taking this cluster right here. Now, this node is quite good. It gives us life and mana on hit already, which helps a lot out with mana sustain with Cyclone and how, like, all of that stuff. But the most important thing is getting the 10% of leeches instant. This will make your recovery feel a lot better. So yeah, definitely take that. As for the cluster, it really doesn't matter. Other than the leech, get Smoking Remains, get Prismatic Heart, whatever you want in front. Just make sure that you have free notables with whatever. I chose Fire one. You can also go for an Elemental one. Now, the two important ones here are the medium clusters, though. You want 2 medium clusters with Towering Threat and Vast Power. Vast Power gives us increased AoE per power charge up to a maximum of 50. So with 2 of these, we get, I think, 42% AoE. And then we also have the Towering Threat, which gives us more life and more AoE. Always nice to have. One thing to also, I guess, talk about is Ghost Dance. We don't have much ES, but it really helps out. It's definitely worth the extra 2 points, even though we're not that high on evasion. It is still enough to make a difference. And also, don't forget the Life Mastery right here for the skills cost life instead of 30% of mana cost. If you're still wondering how to fix mana, you probably forgot this one. As for leveling, you will do that with Smite and the Dexterity stacking gear. This is once again an endgame guide, so I expect that you have leveling gear, at least the most basic one. I will link down in the description a full leveling rundown by Killer for shadow leveling. If you're interested, it's on Maxroll over there. We also have one for each other class. With this setup, you will absolutely annihilate acts. All right, so at the end here, I have a little checklist made in case you feel like the build sucks, right? You want to just come to my stream and call me out, right? Most likely you're doing one of these things wrong. With Cast on Crit, it's a very intricate build. There's certain things that can actually half your damage if you're just like 1% off. And you might think, oh, this sucks, I'm just going to play something easy. But you can learn a ton about the game from playing a build like this. Also, Cast on Crit is one of the most fun archetypes in my opinion. So the checklist, first up, check if your leadership's price is functional. Check if your 2 highest attributes are actually the same. Then, and you will have to check these 2 on POB. First up, if you have too much or too little attack speed on your Cyclone, definitely make sure that you have Onslaught ticked, or against bosses, for example, I don't have the perfect tick rate, but I'm mostly mapping. If you're against bosses and your Onslaught is only up on kill, you have to get it on Flask as well. Just make sure you do that. But you have to have as close to 10 attacks per second as possible. If you have too much, that can also hurt you, so that's really important. And then you definitely have to check your cooldown recovery rate. Once again, if you're 1% off this cooldown recovery rate, you half your damage. So check your Awakened Cast on Crit. If it says 22% cooldown recovery rate or more, you're good, because Saboteur gives you the other 30. Otherwise, you're not good, and you probably have to adjust with like a belt craft or something like that. And then also check if your mana is constantly running out, because if it is, your Cast on Crit does not go off, right? And you can have as good cooldown recovery rate or trigger rate as you want. If you're constantly running out of mana, you're just screwed. All in all, this build is incredibly fun. I can't stop playing Legion and Delhi all day. In fact, I didn't even want to record this video because it would mean I now have to sit down for 3 hours and not farm Delhi with this beauty of a build. It's just so smooth to play. Anything that wants big AoE, Legion, Delhi, whatever you want, it's going to be glorious. However, it's a high budget build. Now, where exactly it's a cutoff, I currently have 140 divines invested. As always with this video, I don't know what happens with the prices once I put out the video, whether people like it or not. Sometimes it goes viral, sometimes it doesn't. I just don't know. But in general, I can tell you that most of the budget will come from having to go cast on crit. Cast on crit always has problems because it also has to cap attack crit. So self-cast would be possible, but you can just do that on your own. Maybe somebody else is going to pick up the flag and do it themselves. In general, my builds are usually a little bit more high budget once I go off of my league starter. Now, the one downside of this build that I will say is that I would really like to have an extra 30-40% movement speed. The build feels amazing, don't get me wrong. Once I have on kill and I have tailwind, it goes a lot faster than what you see right here. I don't know why it's lagging so hard right now. But there is a few issues with this where that are kind of fixed by Frostblink. But if you had a Mage Builder or a Headhunter, obviously, like, I don't even know, Headhunter on this build would be absolutely ridiculous. As for me, I'm probably not going to take this build any further. I'm not going to craft a GG shield. I'm not going to craft any other boots. But if you want to do so, definitely show it to me. Also, if you make a meme AoE version of this with as much AoE as possible, also show it. But overall, really fun build. Would recommend trying out because Crucible mods are probably going to be gone next league, as we all know. And with that being said, since I still never slogan, see you next time.